Hello and welcome to a surprise episode of the Berkcast, the How to Train Your Dragon podcast. I'm your host, HC, and with me is.
Wolf, who didn't
And
think we'd be back here
today,
until June.
that's fast. That last time I was this fast, I was playing Sonic the Hedgehog, but here we are.
Hmm.
So, the How to Train Your Dragon live action remake is like still give or take 2 months away from being released, but considering it just had its world premiere at WorldCon, CinemaCon, sorry, and I heard some positive things about it, which we will talk about later. But apparently, Universal thought, you know what? Let's just greenlit the remake for the sequel. And at first, I thought, you know what? I'm not sure if there is even enough to talk about. Like if there's anything to really talk about. But then when I thought about it, there are some interesting points we can bring up and discuss. So I said, why not? Let's talk about this. So let's start with the RBS. Were you surprised when you heard about this?
I mean, it makes sense that they would do it right because, like, they're doing the first one. Why not do the second one? But it is wild that they said, "Hey, the first one's not even out yet. We don't know if it'll do well or not. Let's just go ahead and say the second one's coming already." That one is definitely surprising because normally they don't do this. Because this movie
Um,
very well, the
I will
first movie
say,
again, it's not been out yet. We don't know anything about it, but it very well could bomb. It could not do well, right?
mhm.
So this could easily come out after a month or two from the first movie's release, and like, yeah, How to Train Your Dragon 2 live action. Nope.
Well, to be honest, I will say this isn't the first time that something like this has been done, and I should stress there were cases before where a movie had a good pre-reception, which is why the studio already launched into a sequel. In case you don't remember, Guardians of the Galaxy had that. Like when the first one was coming out, they had this a few pre-screenings and stuff, and it was doing really well
Have they
because
done
in those
pre-screenings for the live action film yet?
what?
Have they done pre-screenings for the first live action film yet?
So that's what I said. They literally did it now at CinemaCon.
Oh, for how? No, I'm talking about for How to Train Your Dragon live action. They've done pre-screenings for that already.
Yeah,
Okay.
literally at the same time that you're literally at the same
Okay.
time where
I didn't know if they'd done them yet
when
or not.
yeah. So they did just recently.
Okay.
There are some impressions running around. I've seen. I've heard some word of mouth, which we will get to.
Mm-hmm.
But some of it, from what I've heard, is positive, and I guess this is why we're here. Universal saw this and decided, you know what, let's go for it. But it is still a bit weird that the general public is still 2 months away from seeing it. Like it's not a month or a few weeks. No, no, no. This is 2 months. This is a lot. So it is surprising.
True.
But okay, so we already have the sequel announced, and to be fair, it's not like that. It's a rarity for this franchise. We did know that the third movie was coming out. Like the only reason the second one happened was because Dean told them, "Listen, I'm only doing a second one if we are doing a trilogy." So we already knew that. But okay, this is still interesting. And I will say though, we are going to mention Dean in this. So far, nothing besides a release date has been announced. We don't even know if Dean DeBly is coming back to write and direct the remake for the second movie. So this
We
is still up
assume
in
he
the air.
is though.
Like, I guess it's a safe assumption that he would do it, but it's also, as long as it's not announced, I don't want to say that this is the case.
That's fair.
Well, here's the thing. We have this announcement. So, what do you think?
I'm not. This is gonna. I think this is an opinion that's probably gonna change when you see the first live action film, right? But
Mhm.
I, you know, I'm not against it, but I'm also not for it. It really depends, right? Because we've already talked about the first film and where it seems like they're just essentially doing, they're just doing a straight remake. They're not really doing anything inherently different. They're not, really trying. Like Dean first said, oh, we're gonna like, change some things up here or there, and then that turned out to be not really true. They're just doing a straight remake, more or less, maybe not shot for shot, but it's close enough. But I
Mhm.
think we'd all agree the first film did have a few little rocky problems here or there, like the ending, right? Like, hey, all dragons are good except that one. We gotta kill that one.
Yeah.
You could do something there to maybe change it up a little bit, but you don't have to. It's just, wish you would, try to like go out of the comfort zone a little bit, do something, take a little bit of a risk. The second film, it really depends on who you talk to, right? Because either there's quite a few problems with the second film or the second film is damn near perfect as well. It depends on who you really talk to. I'm one of the people who fall in the camp of I think that the second film definitely suffers a few problems. If you're doing the second film, I'm of the opinion that you should 100% be, in my opinion, and I've talked about this many times before, and I'll continue to talk about this, do the evil Valka story. This is your chance now.
That's literally the first thing I thought of when they announced it. This is, and I think this is also what some people may expect because with the live action stigma, I suppose, you could go for the fact this is no longer just aimed at kids. This could also aim at adults. Not to say that the original was just aimed straight at kids, right? Not at all. But
Mhm.
you get what I mean.
Yeah.
The censorship could look at us and go, okay, sure.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And
It's
And,
definitely.
and that, but so with the
Go
live action, and especially with a studio like Universal, and this is gonna come into play here. Universal is one of those studios that, how do I say this, is has a lot of money to it. Like they're a really big competitor in the industry at this current time,
I
in
mean,
this day and age.
they're the
And I
like it's
think
basically them and Disney. They're the big two essentially.
Yeah, and considering Universal now has two animation branches, which is Universal and DreamWorks, maybe there's a good chance that they would want to take a step away if they're doing the sequel. I doubt it at the end of the day. This is a bit more of a wishful thinking on my end.
Hmm.
But you may never know. There's a good chance maybe they'll decide, you know what? Let's actually do something else with it. Let's go with the evil Valka plan. Let's try and follow more of the original vision. And the other thing that's a bit weird to me is that what was one of the big drop points of the original second movie? That sounds weird to say.
One of the big draw points. Again,
When it was announced.
I think it's gonna really depend on who you talk to, but I think the big draw point was Valka, right?
Mm, Not just the well, the redesigns,
Oh,
the 5 years gap.
yeah, yeah. No, you're right. The redesign was definitely the big one. That is true, especially for Hiccup.
Yeah, but that was a big thing though, because in animated movies, when do you ever see the
God, it's
characters
been so long. I
age?
do remember now. People started thirsting over Hiccup so hard.
Again, regarding forget that it did happen, but let's put that to the side for a second. That was a rare thing. Never, if that rarely, if ever, happens in animation that you age
True.
the character like that. So that was an interesting direction to take. And but now in live action, you can't really have much control over that. And this is only 2 years after. You can't really make this 5 years after if the actors don't look it, even though they already look older than 15. But do you get what I mean? It's kind of weird to think about it like that.
it takes a lot of work at the very least, right? But yeah, you're right. Yeah, I get you. It's one of those things that definitely can't really do much with unless you get a different actor, or again, you just cast actors who are older originally, and so now they just get to look their age, quote unquote.
Mhm. Well, so again, it's not really a matter of looking the age. It's more that you can 2 years after it is not 5 years. The difference isn't going to be this big, and that got me thinking. If we have the idea that we can do that the old idea of Valka as the villain, but if we have this thing, why not actually try and make it? Why not just go all the way with it? Make it a Riders of Berkcast Race to the Edge movie, like adapt some of those stories.
I don't think that's something you'll see them do because, love it or hate it, I feel like the show's always been second, like an afterthought. It's always been like secondhand, and secondhand is not like secondhand is not a good thing for that, but it's always been an afterthought. Blah. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that's always been an afterthought. So I don't think you'll see them do anything with the shows per se. They could, but I doubt it. I mean, to be fair, I doubt that
Again,
they'll do
I
anything with an Evil Valka story as well. It'll probably just be another, maybe
yeah,
not
I
shot for
mentioned
shot,
this.
but more or less a remake. Yeah, I know you said it too. I'm saying again,
I mentioned,
restating that.
mm, and I just want to restate it for the audience. We know that it's most likely going to be the second movie and nothing more. That's the easy way out. And if they are going the Disney route, then what can you do? That's the easiest thing. You already have a movie and a script finished, and
And it's
people love
safe.
that movie.
It's easy and
You
it's
know,
safe.
it's easy, it's safe, and I think looking back, I think How to Train Your Dragon 2 is also the highest grossing of the three movies.
Let's see real quick.
I I think that's the only one which made over 600 million globally. The other two are somewhere in the 500 million, if I recall correctly. But but yeah, I am very well aware that this is probably going to be a shot for shot of the second one. That it's probably going to be the same beats and everything. But you know what? If we are considering they surprised us with this announcement, who knows? Why not debate the what if? Why not debate over some other possibilities they could do? Like how many other franchises are being rebooted and stuff, and like the first movie is the safe thing of it's the origin story, it's the start. This is where we have to begin because it's a canon event, quote unquote. Why not go for a different direction with the sequel? No, and nobody said you're tied to it. There's like because if you're saying you're remaking or rebooting How to Train Your Dragon, you know you're going to hit the beats that you need to, right?
Mhm.
No matter how similar or different it's going to be, you have to do Hiccup and Toothless meeting up. You have to do the Viking the Dragon War. You have to do some of those things, right? But if you're going to take this in a new direction and make a sequel to it, why not go all the way? Do something interesting with it. Again, they're not gonna do it, but fun to wonder.
You are correct, by the way. Uh, How to Train Your How to Train Your Dragon 2 was the highest grossing worldwide. Uh, lo- uh, Locally, back in the U.S. and Canada, it was actually not as profitable as the first film, but worldwide, it
That
handily
that I
beat the
do
first film.
know. That I do know. But when you look, but what I mean, when you just do, when you Google, when you wiki it, and you see each one budget and box office, the first number that jumps at you is the 600 million.
Yeah, How to Train Your Dragon 2 was
So
621 million. The first film was 494 million, and the third film was 519 million.
the point stands though.
Yeah,
You're looking at the global overall gross,
yeah.
not in any territory, And if we're just talking about numbers, if How to Train Your Dragon 2 is the highest grossing one, maybe that's the one people connected to the most. Now, I am aware the second one is my personal favorite. Maybe my bias is talking. I don't know.
Sure.
I'm trying to be as non-biased as possible because I do know that despite it being my favorite, it has faults. I
Sure.
acknowledge those faults.
I personally,
Now,
my favorite is still the first film, but no, fair, fair.
yeah, well, I still fair. I would still say, that the first one is probably technically the best, but there are just some things that hit me a bit more with the second one.
That's fair. It's definitely one of those things of if they don't want to do the evil Valka story right, they could at least, I feel, do a bit more with Drago and expand on his stuff a little bit more because I think.
That's the other thing. So you finish, I'll go after.
Oh no, I was just gonna say like he's definitely like a little bit of a weaker villain comparing to
Mhm.
Grimmel. I guess it depends on personal preference, but I definitely think in his film, like just looking at How to Train Your Dragon 2, I think Drago is a little bit weaker, and I think some of that stems from the fact that they had to scrap for, and I forget if we ever figured out or found out the reasons why they scrapped the Evil Walko story. I think a lot of it was just down to they didn't think it would do well, or test audiences, I believe it was, didn't like it, if I'm remembering correctly.
I I heard conflicting stuff about this. I heard that like some of it was like maybe the executive meddling, maybe,
Mm,
but I also heard that there was, though, I think some audience reception to it that wasn't super favorable because it did get pretty far with that idea.
yeah, because
I
they had a
know
lot of
we did.
storyboard. Because I remember they had a lot of storyboards and
Not only that,
everything.
we talked about this on the Berkcast before that there is actually kind of an almost fully completed animation with Jay Baruchel's voice, where he says, "Us flying together. I think I'll choose to remember that," which could imply this line is not in the final movie. Could imply that it was from an earlier draft where Valka was the villain.
Mhm. Yeah, it got really far along before they said, for whatever reason, no, we're not doing that. And like you said, I do think it was down to, I think it was a mix of both. I think it was definitely down to executive meddling and they didn't like it and they just felt that and that the story, like
And then
executives
we
didn't
also
feel
say
like it was a
that.
good story, and then test audiences were iffy on Valko being evil because that was Hiko's mom at the time.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny though when you think about it and that people were like, "Oh, Hiccup's mom is evil." We are not sure about that, but then also there's the whole thing of, wait, what? You know, eh, eh, mm, but then you see all the some reactions after the film came out, and it's like, well, you could have still gone. You could have still gone with it. Because some people don't really like Valka for how she was in the movie, and some of it is completely fair. She is a neglected mother, so like you do. It is interesting, kind of what the difference between test audiences and the final and the actual audience. You know what I mean?
Well, I feel like that's always the case. I feel like every time you hear anything about a test audience, it's always, why do you ever listen to them? Because every time I've heard people talk about, hey, I got into a test audience or insert thing here, it's always, again, this may not always be the case, but I've always heard stuff like, oh, hey, I just said whatever because I didn't really give a shit. Stuff like that. Like test audiences are just there because sometimes you get paid to be there and shit. And so they're just there for that and they don't give a shit about anything. They just write down whatever. It means nothing to them.
Yeah, I know that I've heard stories that some people doing test audience saying are trolling
Or just
sometimes, not all the
testing for
time.
products in general.
Hmm.
Like no one gives a shit. They're just there because they get to do something that no one has gets to do yet, or they get to make a little bit of money, just something like that.
Which does suck.
Well, it generally tends to ruin shit. And I'm
Hmm.
sure companies, I hope companies would realize that this is the case, but you never know.
Yeah, because I know there are some movies which are like, the director looks back at some scene, not specifically How to Train Your Dragon 2 or anything in particular,
Hmm.
but there are, I've heard of stories where the director didn't really like to put a certain scene in the movie, which was later ripped to shreds by critics and general audiences, but it's like, but it tested well, so the studio kind of forces you to put that in there.
Yeah, that would suck. So
Yeah.
it's
So so we have all of this,
okay.
and
If that's the
so
case, maybe they might be more willing to do that now because also the second film came out in 2014, and I I would say conceptions about family were a lot different in 2014 than they are now, right? The way people looked and thought about families and especially moms compared to dads, I would say was different at the time than it is now. Maybe I'm wrong in that. Feel free to yell at me in the
maybe
comments, but I do think conceptions about things like that were different back then than they are now because that was 10 years ago. Almost actually almost 11 years ago now. Good God.
yep.
By the time the
Time flies, huh?
second like live action film comes out, it'll be 13 years ago.
Yeah, you know what, jumping the gun, I did figure, you know what, if this trend continues, then the third movie's remake is gonna release literally 10 years after the original.
No, it'd be more than 10. No.
No, 2029.
Yeah, no, you're after you mean the third film, not the first film, because that'd be
Yeah, the
19.
first one,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
the
yeah.
third one, the third one. If they continue this trend, then the third one is gonna be in 2029, and the third one originally came out in 2019. So it's like
Yeah, so that'd
talk
be
talk about timing.
19 years since the first. God, man. Fuck me.
Hmm.
I feel old.
Yeah.
I'm 34 this year.
Well,
This is too much.
yeah. Tell me about it. Actually, just thinking that the original movie is 15 years old is kind of like, wow, what the hell?
That is something like we've talked about it a little bit before, but I still give DreamWorks a little bit and Universal a little bit of credit here. At least they waited. It seems they're waiting like the full 10 years. Like, hey, it's been 10 years since those films. Let's do something with them. At least they're waiting 10 years or more than 10 years, compared to
Hmm.
Disney, where we're going to do a live action of a film that's only like 3 or 4 years old. Woo. What I'm saying is,
Well,
fuck you, Disney.
you see, so here's the thing. I I'm not saying that the third one is coming at this point because obviously we don't know. What I do
It's
say,
very well they
however,
could
is that
cancel the second one, the second one after the first one releases, and it does not do well
well,
potentially.
the you see, potentially is the key word here,
No, no,
but
for sure.
but again, going back to what the second one could be, I do stand. I'm not an idiot. I am not that naive. I'm sure it's going to be 1-to-1, but they could potentially try and fix it, like some of the stuff that didn't work. Now that they know what the story is, because Dean talked about how with the first one he can now approach it with a full development cycle because originally he and Chris Sanders only came in at the last year and a half of production, and that's a really rushed production cycle, right?
And they had to
Now,
scrap almost everything from what I understood.
mhm. But now you have a full production cycle, and you also have a basis, which the basis is really good. Even if you don't do the evil Valka stuff, you can still look at stuff that people say, maybe this could have been a bit better, maybe this could have changed a bit, maybe this could, and you can just redo it. This would require effort, and while I want to trust Dean, I am not necessarily trusting Universal executives who are probably going to monitor this and it's like, no, 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 we need to do this as much as the same as we can because that's the one that made money, the most money. we need this one to be more like it.
Well, there's also some
So
mistrust for Dean now too, because he did say that's what they're gonna try and do for the first film is add or change a few things, and they've not
so
really done that
far,
as far as
yeah,
we're aware. From the
from
little
what
we've
we know, again, for the record, obviously, we have not seen the pre-screenings. We don't know and the positives I've heard, we'll get to them because I think that's
fair
a
enough.
whole other can of worms. But yeah, based on what we've seen so far, and again, we could completely be eating our hats in a few months, but
True.
so far the additions, if any, or changes, if any, look really minuscule because he also said we want to keep the important moments the same. And let's say there are a lot of important moments in this movie, and a lot of them are trailer worthy.
Now, to be fair to Dean, for the first film, arguably that's fair, right? Because there's not as much there that you would want to change, and anything you do change could very well completely change up the tone of the film entirely. Because there's so little there for you to work with, because the first film is very, very good, and just everything there works. Again,
Hmm.
the only argument you could make
It's
that the
one.
first film is
It's
bad in
one of
any way
those.
was the ending.
Yeah. Again, like I said, the first one is still one of those movies that I kind of call technically perfect. The ending is a bit iffy, and you could also say Hickstrid isn't the best pace,
Mhm.
maybe,
Yeah.
but there are stuff that you can still tweak here and there. But it's still what it sets out to do. It's told really damn well.
Mhm. So, other than what I think we could both agree are basically nitpicks, it's hard to change up stuff for the first film. However, the
Hmm.
second film, we know that there was a different story at one point planned, and whatever the reasons, it was changed. From what we know, those reasons weren't exactly good reasons. It was just changed because of executive meddling, and test audiences said they didn't like it. Times have
Which
changed.
one are we for the
The
for
the
the for
second
the
film,
second one?
the second film.
Hmm.
Times have changed since then, as well as the fact that the second film did have more problems that are more easily addressable by changing things, potentially.
Yeah.
I don't want to get my hopes up, but I think it's a lot more viable and potentially possible to make changes to a second live action film to potentially really make it shine and make it potentially better than the second animated film, at least story
Mhm.
wise.
Yeah, that's another thing that now that you bring up, I'm not sure what it still seems like that the first one is considered the best one by many, but I'm not sure how much the public reception has changed about the second one because I hear some would even start to say that it's the weakest of the three, but some would say that it's great. It's like either the best one or definitely better than the third. So that I think that is interesting to know to kind of see what kind of direction they're going to take.
From what I've seen over the years, I think the first film has always kind of maintained that top spot and it's never really left, which makes sense. That's not too
Yeah.
surprising. The second and third film have always ranged a bit, but I think as time has gone, I think at first, right, they were seen as no, these are better than the first film by most people. I think they would have said within the fandom and just in general audience, the second and third film was better than the first film and really made the trilogy what it was, right? As
Yeah.
time has
Well,
gone on, I
again,
think that perception has
for
changed
all
a
intents.
little bit, but not too much. Like the second and third film are still very popular for what they are.
Yeah, and again, the whole trilogy is overall well loved. It's just
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
two doesn't have the divisive ending, which, for all intents and purposes, you could argue was the point. Because if no one wants Valka to be evil, no one wants to see Hiccup and Toothless separated, right?
Mm.
So there is that. But I think that overall, when it comes down to, I think I've seen that it's interesting. How do I word this? It seems like some of the people who think that the second one is better than that the second one is the least of the movies, but they see it as better than, but it's too many words, too many analytics. Okay, from what I've seen, I'm not saying
Mhm.
this is the case. There are probably exceptions, but it seems that the people who think that the second one is the least good are the ones who've only seen the movies.
Mhm.
The people who are more into the franchise, the TV show, short films, they're the ones who says, well, even if the second one isn't as good as the first, it's better than the third. That's just a general thing I personally noticed. I'm not sure
Same.
if it applies to everyone.
I've seen pretty much the same as well, I would say. I think general reception is the third film is the weakest out of the three, generally speaking. Second, and then it just
It's
ranges. Then it really just depends on who you talk to, whether or not they think the first is the best or the second is the best.
Mhm. Yeah, it's always like it's mostly which one is the second best, but I do know that there are a lot of people who like that one the most, like
Yeah,
me, or like the third one the most even. Because again, saying one is your favorite, it doesn't necessarily mean you think it's the best one technically.
yeah, no, fair, fair.
So we talked about all of this. The point is, I guess, this is actually an interesting one to see how they'll pull off because of all because of some like the Valka stuff and some other things. It'll be interesting to see how they pull it off, but I kind of want them to be brave with it. I want them to give us the Race to the Edge movie. That could work.
Mm? Give us the live action show.
Yeah, that's what I mean, though. You could, when I say the live action show, you could take some plot lines from the show and put them in live action and call that the sequel for a bit, because you still need to wait on that age gap, right? Why not do that? Again, just because you remade the first one pretty faithfully doesn't mean you can't you can do something different with a sequel, which again I know they won't do, but one can hope.
Or do a live action show in between
I
stuff.
doubt we're gonna get there.
Nah, come on. You don't want a live action show?
No.
Really? Genuinely, would you be interested in a live action show? Like a live action Race to the Edge? Genuine question.
Mm, depends on what you do with it.
Hmm, fair. I would definitely say I'm in a similar boat. I would be interested. That is something, but would very highly depend. Yeah.
You know what? What would you, if you had to go? I don't have to do this exactly like the second movie. What would you do? What would be your far fetched idea?
For a How to Train Your Dragon 2 live action?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Well, I would definitely. What I think I would do would be Evil Valka for the second film and resolve that plot and that storyline within the second film. And then the third film is completely different, where it's not Grimmel you're focused on, it's Drago. Maybe Grimmel's involved, but it's really Drago that you're focused on for the third film. And
And
he's
again,
the
you
big bad.
could. That's another thing I was thinking of. Let me ask you this. You know how the original plan was Valka was the villain of the second movie, Drago would have been mentioned and then became the villain of the third one.
Mm-hmm.
How would you feel if they do the thing with Valka as the villain in in the second remake, but they skip Drago and go straight to Grimmel?
Hmm. I don't know. That one's tough. I don't think I would like it as much. And that's simply because I think Drago, even if he got the short end of the stick, I still prefer him as a villain more than I do
Mhm.
Grimmel.
Yeah.
But Grimmel is a really good villain for Hiccup, though.
Well,
Like, say what you will about the
that's
third
an
film, I do think Grimmel and Hiccup are really good counterparts and reflect each other in really interesting ways, right? And like, it's a really great character dynamic. I don't
yeah.
think we got to explore it enough.
Mhm.
Hmm. You know, I would argue
Yes.
this is my far fetched idea. Not a trilogy,
Okay.
4 films. Second
Four
film is
films.
Valka,
Okay.
with Grimmel coming in the second film as well.
Mhm.
Grimmel's working for Drago. That leads into the third
Mhm.
film where you deal with Drago completely, and that leads into finding a new home and everything. And you don't see Grimmel in the
Okay.
third film. Maybe you see him like
Mhm.
close to the end, like a an Avengers style like ending end credit scene
That's
and everything.
something I was actually going to ask you. Do you think there's going to be a post-credit scene for this remake that will set up the second one? We get to see Valka and going like,
End credit scene are
like
all the rage now, so I wouldn't be surprised, right?
yeah. And I think now that we know the second one is happening, it's announced. There's a release date. There's everything. I I kind of want. They are probably going to do this.
And to be fair, I don't mind end credit scene. I know a lot of US audiences will get up and leave during credits. I don't mind sitting there watching credits and seeing everything scroll by and just reading a little bit.
I guess.
Generally,
I guess
they
it
play music
depends on
during it
what.
too, and it's music from the movie itself. So I'm cool with it. I don't mind
I guess it depends on what the ending sequence is, because I can tell
for
like
sure.
sometimes sometimes not just, but like let's say with the MCU, sometimes the really important one is the one that's in the middle of the credits, but then you can wait until the end, you'll get another scene, but it's usually something that's not really worth waiting for, like it's just a
True.
joke essentially, and
That's fair.
then you're
There's been
like,
a
oh,
few that they've done with that. It's kind of like, that was kind of a waste of time, but okay.
like I remember there was the one in Spider-Man: Homecoming where it's where it's Captain America just showing up and talking to you about patience and how patience can be the key to victory, but sometimes you're just wondering why you wasted your time for essentially nothing.
That feels
And it's like,
really heavy-handed, Disney.
and it's like, and it's one of those. I remember there were, and people were so split on that it's just like, on the one hand, it's funny, it's hilarious because even Cap in the movie, because right after he says that, he goes, how many more of these? Because you can tell that even he's gonna sick of this. Even he doesn't want to keep doing this anymore. But then again, it doesn't change the fact that you still waited a long ass
And
time.
it's also
Just
very heavy-handed. It's like, hey, you should wait for the end credits, guys. It's okay. You should be patient. It's like very heavy-handed on your part there, Disney.
Mhm.
Like,
Also because I think this was the time where people were looking forward to some of the Infinity War teasers. So it's like,
mm.
you're really pushing your luck there. But
So yeah, you are right. It
as
definitely like, if the end credit scene isn't worth it, that can definitely sour the taste a little bit. I don't mind it as much, but I can understand that souring the taste for some people if it's just like, here's something that didn't really matter and you waited for nothing. That's completely fair. But yeah, you get, so basically we have the first film. They keep that more or less the same, right? Maybe you tease Volka a little bit at the end, something, I don't know, doesn't matter. Second film, evil Volka. You get Grimmel coming in close to the end, and that kind of unites Hiccup and Volka together and everything, right? And
Mhm.
you know, and instead of the fuck, the Bewilder Beast, couldn't remember the name. Instead of the two Bewilderbeast fighting in the second film, you kind of get like, it's Grimmel, and Grimmel's done some shit. Maybe Grimmel kills Volka's Bewilderbeast, and that's that, right? Because he has the poison and everything, and he does his own stuff like that. Doesn't matter. Figure it out. You're the storytellers, not me. I'm just coming up with ideas.
But the other thing I want to bring up, and let's ignore the third one for a bit, okay, to some
Hmm.
degree. But you can tell when you're watching the first one, even now that we know we have the sequels, we have the show, all of that. But there are points like in the first movie, there's in one of the dragon training scenes, like in the arena, there's the point where Hiccup keeps asking about Night Furies because he just encountered Toothless, and Gumber tells them nobody met one and lived to tell the tale. Now we know that's true for Belk, but to the third movie, we know that Stuick is aware of Grimmel and what's Grimmel's thing, killing the Night Furies. What I'm asking is that now that we know we're headed towards the franchise, we know where the story is going. What? How many? How many hints can they actually put in there and still make it feel like its own movie? That's something that
Hmm.
we'll probably have to wait for the movie to for the remake to see. But I feel like there is potential to do franchise building here. Like if you want to do a show, you could make a show. You not necessarily live action because I also know that let's say live action shows budget is a factor, and
Listen,
I don't want the quality to decrease, but I also want the dragons to be there. I'm not
Everything
sure.
Dragon live action, zero dragon.
Mm, well, yeah, I was going to bring up Knuckles I was about to bring up Knuckles as a comparison, right?
Fair, yeah.
So I do wonder how much you could actually expand this if you already have a sequel plan. Regardless if you're actually going to change anything or if you're doing it one to one. Interesting to wonder.
No, fair. And I would argue, right, based off the idea I was talking about, right, where you have Grimmel appear in the second film, Valk is evil, third film is devoted more or less entirely to Drago, and then you do a fourth film where Grimmel comes back for that, last bit of revenge, right, to come after Toothless this time. And that's his only goal is to get Toothless and everything. And then you end with the same ending as the third film, where hey, the dragon, Hiccup and Toothless separate, and dragons go their way, and the Vikings go theirs, basically, and all that jazz.
Hmm.
Show
Oh,
don't tell is really powerful in this regard if you want a franchise build, if you're smart,
hmm
because you can put things within a scene that hint at Drago and Grimmel and all this other stuff, right? There's some good stuff here you can do. Will they do it? I don't know, but you could, and it'd be interesting. And if you're willing to do it, you could make like again, I think I'm always still going to be partial to the animated stuff. But if you want this to be a genuine, full story, you could look at where the animated movies dropped the ball at here or there and did fail at from time to time, and really take that and make that shine and really run with that. There is the potential here. Again, we don't know if they'll do it, and it's highly likely they won't, but you could. And the fact
Because
that you
as I
could is
said a long
interesting.
time ago, before we even had a trailer, I said we haven't seen DreamWorks or rather Universal making a live action remake of an animated movie. So you could never know. Maybe the sequel could surprise us because I will say the few Disney live action remakes that did get a sequel, say what you will about them, they didn't like a Maleficent, for example. There was no Sleeping Beauty sequel that had to be made up. And for the record, I if you listen to our podcast about it, I hate the first Maleficent. They didn't bother with the second one. But the fact of the matter is they did make something original for it, but that's because they didn't
True.
have anything. Now, Lion King, as much as I think the remake is insufferable and insulting, and as much as I also think that Mufasa is insulting from what I've heard about it, I am not giving it my time of day. I'm very sorry. I heard it's pretty as much as it insults and disregards the original movie, like Lion King in general. It's still a new movie technically. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that they don't take Lion King 2 and redo it, right? They decided let's make a prequel about Mufasa and destroy everything about his relationship with Scar that makes him unlikable and makes Scar the right person to kill him, but that's a whole other thing. So
Listen,
who knows?
at least they tried.
You say that. I doubt there was a try. They said, let's make a prequel about Mufasa, and then they stopped.
Fair. I'm always gonna be of the opinion I want you to do new stuff, right? I don't for these live action things. I don't want you to just do a shot for shot or just a remake essentially. I want you to try
Hmm.
new things and do different stuff because technically speaking, these are different mediums, and you do have different things you can do here and different things you can try here. There are things that work in live action that do not work in animation. There are things that work in animation that will never work in live action. That's just the way it is. So
Hmm.
I want you to try these different things, and I also want you to just go further than that and do stuff that you couldn't do for the original, or maybe not completely change up the story, but make changes where changes could be needed or useful. Right? I always am going to be of the opinion that that's the way you go for doing stuff like this because it basically is your chance to make that film again. I don't Mm. I don't want to necessarily say better, but you can remake that film again and do better than what you may have did the last time. You can fix where your mistakes were. Some people might argue the mistakes are what made the film what it was, and there's a discussion that you can have there, right? That there is perfection in there that there is perfection in imperfections, right?
Hmm.
But I'm still going to be of the opinion, and I will still argue that you can attempt to make those changes and see how it does. Maybe it works out. Maybe you are able to tell a better story, even if people still prefer the first one. You can't argue. You can still say that. Oh well, this one did tell the better story potentially.
Hmm.
I think that's worth trying. Always, I think 100% we should do that. Now, I'm in the minority there. I'm also not the money person. So I don't get to make that decision. But it's what I would like to see if I was an audience member. And it's what I would shoot for if I was someone who was in charge and I was the money person.
Yeah.
Would it always work out?
So
Probably not.
no.
But I think
So,
it's
but
worth
you know
trying.
what's and now speaking of working out, I think we kind of talked a lot about what we think this could, this should, this maybe. We talked a lot about that. So I'm going to throw in an idea. Okay, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to throw in a different point of conversation, which I was going to bring up anyway.
I'm listening.
So the first remake so far from the people who've seen it is getting positive reviews. Okay, from what I've seen, I've seen two that I recall on top of my head. One says that while the bar for these live action remakes isn't high, it's still it this remake still sets it up really high for Disney to ever catch up. Okay?
Interesting.
And the other one I've seen is that the first 20 minutes are actually really bad and are relying a lot on Tell Don't Show, which is the How to Train Your Dragon no. But after those 20 minutes, the movie just completely fixes itself and becomes really, really, really good.
Hmm.
So for one, interesting takes from both sides, right?
From these two
Now,
people, do you know if they've I assume they've watched the old film franchise, right?
that's the thing. Not sure. Unsure about
Okay.
that.
Never mind then.
Mhm. No, but I do. But the things that I do want to take away from this is I'm because I've been thinking. Okay, and we may have talked about this, but I always expected this remake to do well when it comes to movie reviews because some of the Disney remakes got good reviews too, right?
Yeah, there's
And
definitely there's I remember seeing a thing, right? I think there's definitely been a bit of a disconnect between general audience. I mean, there's always for movies for some time now. There's been a disconnect
yeah,
between
there's
general audience and critics, right?
in a lot of ways, yes. This is
Now,
not just it's not just a this movie thing,
yeah.
it's in general.
Now
Yes.
for the live action remakes from Disney, I think that has somewhat stayed the same. That though there were a few films where general audience and critics agreed, right? But I think it's
Hmm.
mostly, I'd have to look it up again, but I swear, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's mostly been critics have been more positive, general audiences have not, but it does depend on the film. In a few
Hmm.
cases, I think it was critics were less positive, general audience was really positive. So it was a little bit dependent on the film, but I want to say overall it was critics more positive, general audience is not, which
That
sometimes happens.
that's it. Yeah, that seems to be the thing. But so with this, the one thing I found it interesting that one of them said that it sets the bar really high for for the remakes, and Disney won't be able to catch up. And I've been thinking uh, from the Disney remakes, from the Disney movies, the originals that got remakes. How to Train Your Dragon is arguably better than most of them, like the original.
Hmm.
So, and again, I'm not saying that you can't like one of them more than How to Train a Dragon. I'm not saying that it's the best one out of them. I like, it's up there with Lion King for me, and Beauty and the Beast is also a really well-made movie. I'm not saying that it's not. Love Aladdin too, but it seems that How to Train Your Dragon is more well regarded than a lot of those movies. At least it's it's the one that's in the same conversation with Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. You get me? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's fair. It's definitely like there are definitely a few Disney animated films that either compared to or better than How to Train Your Dragon, but that list is very small, right?
Again, from the ones that got remakes, I should stress from the ones that
The
got
ones that got
remakes
remakes.
because that.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's basically either Beauty and the Beast and Lion King, which are like the bees.
Aladdin, maybe?
Aladdin too. Not to say I love Aladdin. I love Aladdin too, but I think Beauty and the Beast though is the one that was nominated for Best Feature at the time, which
Mm-hmm.
was unheard of in the Oscars. And
Right.
Lion King is like the big magnum opus for Disney. So that's why I'm saying those two.
No. Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Now, the thing is that as much as they are shot for shot, and as much as they're lazy and doing it, it's still different directors trying to copy the original, and that's never really going to work out. So, saying that a movie that's already as good, if not better, than all of those movies, and with the same writer director is much better, isn't it kind of cheating? I assume you agree with me.
Yeah, I kind of do. But at the same
Be-
time,
That's the reason I'm saying, though. The reason that they say that it sets the bar up for those remakes isn't necessarily because it's doing something special or that it's so well done that it replaces the original. It's just that you have the exact same person in charge of the exact
but
same story that you already perfected. You
is
can't
it
really compete with that.
is it cheating though if you're just using an advantage that you have? You know, if I was Disney and I could get the exact same director that I had on the um animated version of Mulan for live action Mulan, why not do that, right? Because that's the person who knows that movie the best, especially if they can direct live action, which Dean can. Why not bring that person in? Why not have them like head of production and head director and everything?
Well, I think this is one of those because Dean claims that he's doing the remake in order to get it right, but there's a good, but the offer had to have come to him, right? They wouldn't. It's not that Universal just wanted to do it and just said we are not going to contact him because he did the original. They obviously had to come to him. He didn't just storm in there and said, "Okay, you know what? No, I'm gonna do this, bitches, because I want to make sure you do this right." It's not. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, as much as he wants to say like, no, no, I'm here to make sure everything's done right. No, they probably, yeah, you're right. They most certainly came to him first, like, hey, do you want a shot at this? Question mark. Because this is your chance. If you don't do it, we'll get someone else. So, and he's like, oh, fine.
Hmm.
Where he's like,
So with that,
I could use more of that bag. Let's go.
so with that being, so now you see what I mean when I say there is a bit of an advantage to How to Train Your Dragon that the other Disney remakes didn't
Oh,
have.
100%. There's an advantage. I argue though, if you're able to take that advantage, you should take it. If Disney, I don't know how many of the directors
You see,
for.
but that's an advantage in critics, but is it an advantage when it comes down to the people you're trying to attract? Some of them are fans, and we talked about this.
I would argue
The
it is.
remake trailers try to to sell themselves to fans with the amounts of stuff that's referencing directly the original.
Mhm.
So that's another. Oh, look at that! Someone
They
was
sent
probably hurt from all us talking about that.
you. They're sending the movie police after you.
No, this is not a police. This is an
Oh,
ambulance. So it's
even
after the.
worse.
I guess I should be the Universal people are after me. Shit. But anyway, so
They're
but
getting prepared.
I just think. So again, is it how much is it an advantage, and how much should I take this kind of review seriously when my problem with the remake is that it's going to be the exact same movie, just real. And why do I need to watch the exact same movie but real when the animated one still exists and I can just put it on and have a blast with it again?
I would
Obviously, I'm going to do that because we have a podcast to do about it, but
fair. I would still argue that it is an advantage. It's definitely something I think you should take advantage of if you have the ability to do that, right? I don't know how many of the directors and the people who originally worked on the animated movies are still alive. I assume a good few of them
well,
are alive for the.
most of them are.
Yeah.
Some of them still make movies.
Yeah, no, no. I kind of figure most of them are. I don't know how many of them have live action experience, but I assume at least a few of them do. If I was Disney, I would absolutely get them involved on a live action remake. Especially if they again,
Yeah.
especially if they have live action experience like Dean does, because and you might argue Dean doesn't have a ton of live action experience, but he does have some, and that's more than nothing, right? That's important because that gives you that insight to know this is what works for an animated film, this is what works for a live action film, and you can more easily translate because you have that experience with both the good things from the animated film into live action and make a good live action film, right? And you know where you can and can't make changes in that regard. And you are the most familiar with that story at that point, too. Now, some of them may not, now, many of them may not have been interested, but if you have someone who's interested in doing that, I would still say, again, that's an advantage you have for your live action remake. You should take it 100% of the time. It will do you more good than harm, I would say.
Yeah.
So, is it cheating? You could make the argument. Is it fair to compare? You could make the argument that it may not be. I would say, sucks to be Disney. You should have been doing that if you had the chance to do that. The fact that you didn't,
And
that's on you.
so this actually segues me into another point I want to bring up, where it's not really a point, but it's just something that I personally found interesting and also a bit cool. Not sure if you've been following movie news recently, but Disney released a remake of Snow White, and it bombs like big time.
Yeah, I was looking at the Rotten Tomatoes stuff. Like they have a list for like all the
Forget
live
Rotten
action.
Tomatoes. This movie is a bomb. It's
Well,
the
no,
it's
no, I was just looking at like all the different live actions and kind of how well they've done in terms of like general audience and reviewers.
mhm.
Snow White's the se-
Yeah,
the worst one is
it's very
Pinocchio.
low.
Snow White is the second worst,
Yeah,
followed very closely by
it,
Dumbo.
it's it's really bad in terms of the score and the box office. And for the record, that we know there are a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of controversy with Rachel Zegler and stuff. We're not going to talk about this now. This is
Hmm.
not the point I want to make. The thing is though, Snow White, the original, first feature-length animated movie ever made, which put Disney on the map, right? To some extent, this needed to be the most important remake to date because you're not just touching another Disney classic, you're touching the one. You're touching the one movie that's important to the film industry as much as anything because that's the movie that put Disney on the map. That's the movie that put animation on the map.
Holy shit! You are. I'm sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt. You are kidding. It bombed hard. Holy
that's what
fuck!
I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. It's
That
not.
thing,
I heard that
a $209 million budget, and worldwide it only made
without
147 million.
marketing, without marketing, I should
Without
stress.
holy shit! Yikes! Yikes! Oh,
Yikes.
that's a hard hit. Wow. Whew. That is definitely a bomb. But yeah, sorry, continue.
Yeah, so they just released this bomb, right? And this is a
Mhm,
very big bomb for the. It's a very big hit for Disney,
mhm, mhm.
right?
Yeah, especially
Now,
Snow White, one of their
when
classics.
when does this announcement of How to Train Your Dragon 2 the remake comes out? A week after Snow White bombs and continues to bomb. Well, we're definitely looking at some sort of, game here of, of corporate, right?
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's not I don't encourage this, that corporate, but I'm not gonna lie, there is a side of me that's a bit happy that Universal not only apparently really believes in How to Train Your Dragon, right? You can say whatever you want to say about them greenlighting like the Nine Realms and all of that stuff and the remake in general. You can say what you will about them. It seems like there's at least someone there that believes in the franchise
True,
to at least believe that there's a staying power behind it
true.
because not only greenlight a remake but greenlight a sequel to the remake like just based on some good words that came out of it and announce it at the same time as Disney is suffering such a big bomb. And it's not just a big bomb, but they just released a statement that the Tangled remake they planned is canceled or at least postponed because of that bomb. So there is something kind of cool about How to Train Your Dragon being used as a trump card against Disney, you know?
I mean, it's always kind of been DreamWorks. I would argue DreamWorks trump card against Disney, right? Because
I mean, in terms of critical reception, maybe.
I mean, I have always argued, and I will continue to argue, and you can kind of say, and some of these films were being made at similar-ish times, so it's not in, so it's maybe not the best argument, but I will always argue that I think How to Train Your Dragon came out, and it definitely changed up the game for animation at the time it came out. The first film, to be specific,
Mhm.
right? Because after How to Train Your Dragon came out, you started getting a few different other films from Disney and Pixar, right, at that time that were similar in nature to what How to Train Your Dragon was, right? And how they were animated and
Uh,
how
uh,
they told their
actually,
story.
you want to talk about it? Look no further than How to Train Your Dragon 2's biggest competition, I suppose, Big Hero 6. That's literally How to Train Your Dragon, but with a robot.
Mm. See, I will always argue. I think How to Train Your Dragon, the first film, really set the bar for animation at that point in time because and changed the game
Mhm.
for animation at that point in time. So I think this has always been their trump card over Disney. Personally, it's
You see, in the again, in terms of impact and the general quality, yes, but in terms of box office and I guess staying power, we talked about this before. How to Train Your Dragon is a bit more niche compared to some of the other DreamWorks franchises out
fair.
there
Yeah.
and some Disney stuff. So so it's always like the one that people say, yeah, it's a great one. It's one of the best animated franchises out there. Then, but then it's kind of like moved to the side. It's like, oh yeah, like in a general conversation with casual moviegoers, you'll be like, oh yeah, How to Train a Dragon. That's good. That's a good one. That's great. But you don't really get people who are enthusiastic about it besides the big fans.
Mm. Fair. It's true.
So I think so in that sense, I think it's really cool and really encouraging that Universal seems to really bank on it. And again, it's corporate. It's not what I want them to do with the franchise. It's not it's doing the same thing all over again. I am aware. Now, that being said, who's to say hmm, who's to say it's a bad thing when a studio believes in a franchise you love?
Well, I mean, there's always a positive that comes with this. Yes, you get the live action remakes. You may not like that. That's fair. The positives from this, if the live action remakes do at least okay to even good or even great, there's a very good possibility you get more animated stuff for How to Train Your Dragon. That you get more How to Train Your Dragon stuff in general, even. I'm never going to complain about, as a fan, at the very least, I'm never going to complain about getting more of the thing I already love and enjoy. I may not love and enjoy the remake when it comes out. We will see. But if it does well enough and I can get more animated stuff off of that, whatever they might do, doesn't matter. I'm kind of here for that personally, right?
Yeah.
I will take my cons with my pros. I will take my good and my bad here. More How to Train Your Dragon, but I have to get live action remakes. I'll accept that, that exchange. That's worth to
It's
me personally.
uh, so what you're saying is it's essentially a necessary evil.
Unfortunately, yeah, because would we have gotten anything How to Train Your Dragon otherwise?
Well, should I make the obvious point of the Nine Realms? But I get what you mean.
I- I'm gonna. There was no Nine Realms in Bossing Say.
Well,
You
different franchises, so you're not wrong.
there, well, we don't talk about Nine Realms.
Yeah, well, yeah, it does suck. I agree, but I get what you mean. I get what you mean.
But yeah, like I'm all down for good other How to Train Your Dragon things. And if the only way I can get that is I have to put up with or I have to accept that we have to have live action remakes, I'll take that trade. I don't want the last thing How to Train Your Dragon that I watch to be the Nine Realms. The last new How to Train Your Dragon thing I watch to be the Nine Realms. Personally.
Okay, that's very fair. Now, so I just figured it's interesting to say it's interesting to see this franchise use has backing behind it and having confidence in it. And
Sure.
I think Universal knows what they're doing because they make a lot of billion-dollar movies. Not all of them, but they do make a lot of them. So I trust their marketing team to at least get people interested. And something tells me it's going to make money.
Fair.
Is it going to make a billion? I am not. I'm not 100% certain, but you may never know.
I've said it before. I'll say it here again. I'm willing to give it a shot. I, I am interested. We will see where it goes as we learn more.
Well, I guess we will. We again 2 months until this remake, and who knows where things are gonna go. I
We'll
guess.
be
I guess.
here to talk about it.
I guess the next time is going to be the remake now. I think, unless they suddenly drop another surprise at us.
How to Train Your Dragon 4 live action. Did we announce number 3? No, we're just going straight to 4. Or
I
How to
don't
Train Your
even want to
Dragon live
comment on
action show. That'll be the announcement.
that. Well, right now we all we know 2 months, and then we shall see.
Fair enough.
So, anything else to say?
No, I'm hesitantly hopeful.
Well, then I guess that's all for this episode of the Berkcast. We hope you enjoyed it. What do you think about the sudden announcement? And does it get you more excited for the remake? Does it make you worried? What do you think they'll do with the How to Train a Dragon 2 remake? You can tell us all about it in the comment section below, on our Twitter, which is Berkcast with capital B, capital C, and on our Tumblr, which is Berkcast Team. So until next time, probably when the remake comes out, maybe, I was HC.
I was Wolf.
And we will see you all next time. Take care.
Bye bye.